Picture this. It's the 1880s. You've just stepped off a boat into New York City. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke, roasting chestnuts, and something else. The smell of desperation. You've heard tales of a new life, of streets paved with gold. But what you find is a labyrinth of crowded, dirty tenements, especially in places like the Lower East Side. This isn't just New York. This is the world of the Bohemian slums, a place where artists, writers, immigrants, and dreamers all collide in a brutal struggle for survival. How did anyone make it out alive? Let's walk down these cobblestone streets. Forget personal space. In a typical tenement building, a single, tiny apartment, maybe 300 square feet, could be home to 10, 12, sometimes more people. Families were crammed into 1 or 2 rooms, often with no windows, no running water, and a shared outhouse in the backyard that served the entire building. Disease was rampant. Cholera, tuberculosis, and typhoid spread like wildfire through the contaminated water and crowded conditions. The air was so foul that people said you could taste it. Just breathing was a risk. So, how did you earn a living? For many, the answer was the sweatshop. Garment work was huge. Entire families, including young children, would huddle around a table, sewing pieces of clothing for 14, even 16 hours a day. They were paid by the piece, meaning every second counted. A moment's rest meant less food on the table. The pay was pennies. A whole day as grueling labor might earn you just enough for a loaf of stale bread and some cabbage. It was a relentless cycle of work, exhaustion, and poverty. But this world wasn't just about factory work. The streets themselves were a marketplace of hustles. You had newsies, young boys shouting headlines on every corner, fighting for the best spots. There were street vendors selling everything from hot corn to questionable oysters. Organ grinders with monkeys. Rag pickers sorting through trash for anything valuable. Every person was part of a complex, informal economy. Survival meant being resourceful, quick-witted, and maybe a little bit ruthless. You had to have a side gig, a hustle, something to fall back on when your main source of income inevitably dried up. Food was a constant worry. For the poor, the diet was monotonous and nutritionally poor. Stale bread, potatoes, cabbage soup. Meat was a rare luxury. To stretch their budgets, people would buy food that was on the verge of spoiling from street carts. Sometimes, the only fresh meat available was from the butcher's floor scraps. Community was key here. Neighbors would pool their resources, sharing a pot of soup or looking after each other's children. These small acts of kindness were the glue that held the community together against the crushing weight of poverty. Now, let's talk about the Bohemian part of these slums. Greenwich Village, even back then, was becoming a haven for artists, writers, and thinkers who rejected mainstream society. They were drawn to the cheap rent and the raw, unfiltered energy of the city's underbelly. They lived in drafty attics, called garrets, and spent their days writing poetry, painting canvases, and debating philosophy in dimly lit cafes and taverns. Think of Walt Whitman, wandering these very streets, absorbing the chaos and turning it into poetry. These bohemians often lived in voluntary poverty, choosing art over comfort. They were fueled by coffee, cheap wine, and a burning desire to create something new, something true. Their lives were a stark contrast to the rigid Victorian morals of the time. They were rebels, and their presence added a unique, vibrant, and sometimes chaotic layer to the slums. They shared the same struggles for rent and food as the immigrants. But their poverty was often a choice, a statement against the materialistic world. This created a fascinating melting pot where a starving artist might be living next door to a family of Irish immigrants, both just trying to make it to the next day. The social scene was centered around places like Pfaff's Beer Cellar, an underground saloon that became the epicenter of American bohemianism. Here, writers, actors, and freethinkers gathered to exchange ideas, recite poetry, and escape the harsh realities waiting for them outside. It was a sanctuary, a place where you could be yourself, no matter how unconventional. But even here, danger was never far. The line between a lively debate and a drunken brawl was incredibly thin. The streets at night were a different world altogether. The flickering gaslights cast long, eerie shadows. Gangs like the Bowery Boys and the Dead Rabbits ruled the 5 Points, one of the most notorious slums in the world. Robberies were common, and walking alone was a gamble. The police force was corrupt and often ineffective, leaving residents to fend for themselves. Every alleyway could hold a threat. You learned to walk with purpose, to keep your eyes open, and to know which streets to avoid after sundown. Yet amid all this darkness, there was an incredible resilience. People found joy where they could. Street musicians played lively tunes on fiddles and accordions, drawing crowds and spontaneous dancing. On hot summer nights, people would escape their stuffy apartments to sit on the fire escapes and stoops, gossiping, singing, and sharing stories. Children, despite the hardships, found ways to play. They turned the crowded streets into their playgrounds, creating games with sticks, hoops, and their own imaginations. These moments of connection and joy were vital. They were a declaration that even in the most brutal conditions, the human spirit refuses to be extinguished. So, how did you survive? You survived by being tough. You survived by being clever. You survived by relying on your neighbors. You survived by finding beauty in the cracks, whether it was a poem scribbled in a garret or a shared laugh on a tenement stoop. The Bohemian slums of 1800s New York were a brutal, unforgiving world. But they were also a crucible of creativity, community, and incredible human strength. The stories from these streets are a powerful reminder of the will to not just exist, but to live, to create, and to dream, even when the world around you is falling apart. The legacy of this era is still visible in New York today. The art, the music, the literature, spiritual, and the very cultural fabric of the city were forged in these crowded, chaotic neighborhoods. It's a history that's both grim and inspiring, a testament to the people who faced unimaginable hardship and still managed to build a future. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey back in time as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what part of this story surprised you the most. See you in the next one.